My name's Sasha Pete, and I'm joined by a fantastic individual, none other than the great Peter Tsolakis. Welcome, Gus, to this conversation.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Now, Gus, firstly, how did you get that nickname?
Wow. That was that nickname came about when I first went to Heidelberg. I got a transfer from Port Melbourne to Heidelberg, but we'll get back into that later. But well, at the time there was quite a lot of Scots and Poms that were playing for Heidelberg, and back then rhyming slang was a big thing. So Stevie Marley, who was a left back at Heidelberg at the time, with his Scottish accent, was calling me the wee Gus Meter Peter, to imitate the Scottish accent. Anyway, but being young and naive, I didn't know what he was talking about. And I went up to him after a couple of weeks, went up to him and said, Stevie, who's this Gus Meter? Is he a mate of yours in Scotland or something? Do I look like him? And he just pissed himself laughing. And he just thought it was so hilarious that he just started calling me Gus.
Brilliant.
So, and that name has stuck with me for now, what is it, 33 years?
Beautiful, beautiful. So
I don't answer to the name Peter anymore.
It's a good story. So thanks to your Scottish teammates at Heidelberg.
Yeah.
And wind back. How did you fall in love with our great game?
Well, for those who don't know, my father, when he migrated to Australia as a 17, 18-year-old, late 50s, early 60s, ended up by default playing at South Melbourne. Got invited down. He was in the reserve side, and the then coach Manny Pulakakis saw him in the reserves, pulled him into the seniors, and he ended up winning a few championships with South Melbourne through that 60s period, 60, 61, 62, 63. So I guess I was probably not forced into it, but it was in the blood. My dad played it, and he, as a junior, he took me down to South Melbourne and introduced me to football, and I fell in love with the game. That's brilliant.
And you played a couple of years at South Melbourne in the juniors there, but there was some, if I heard correctly, there was some little revolt there, and you picked up and you moved across. Tell us the story there.
All right. So I just to correct you, I never actually played for South Melbourne in the juniors. I never got to play. So I was probably around 10 years old.
Okay.
And we just gone to training. We were probably training for a few weeks.
Okay.
And as happens with so-called Greek clubs, there was an argument, a fight between the junior committee and the senior committee at South Melbourne. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but all I remember is the coach at the time, whose name was Strato Kalogiro, George Kalogiros, who played for South Melbourne, his father. His dad actually played with my dad during that 60s period. So that's another reason why my dad took me there. He just got that whole team up, put us in the cars, and I remember this vividly, put us in the cars, and we went as a convoy from South Melbourne to Port Melbourne and jumped out of the cars. It was a Sunday morning, and trained at Port Melbourne. And that was it. That was my time at South Melbourne in juniors. It was only a couple of
training sessions.
Yeah, and ended up at Port Melbourne.
And by all reports, you guys had a super team. So, like, call out some of the names in that squad, or who ended up playing in that team that you ended up having there at Port.
When we first started that actual junior team, that was like from under 11s or under 10s, under 11s at Port Melbourne, was myself, Joe Palatsides, George Kalogiros, Mehmet Jurakovic, Aki Kudzamichalis.
Wow.
Who's, all five of us ended up playing National League. And then there were some other players who probably, I could probably say more gifted. But, sometimes you need a little bit of luck in football. In life in general, you need luck. But, we actually went on and played in the National League. But then later on, a couple of years later, Michael Peterson came to the team, Andrew Zinni.
What a talent. We'll just stop there for a moment with Peterson. Probably, by recall, I remember he had a central midfield role for the Socceroos. He could get the ball and ping it from one side of the park to another on a dime.
Yeah.
Did he have that talent as a junior as well, being the vision to be able to just get the ball and ping it?
100%.
Wow.
100%. I think it might have been instilled into him from his father.
Yeah.
His father was a sensational coach. He ended up coaching us at Port Melbourne in the latter years, I think from under 14, 15, 16. And then we went into reserve football and senior football, and his dad transitioned into senior football and coached us there as well. And I think his dad had a really big influence on him in terms of his footballing, and fantastic footballer.
As a young boy, he ended up getting signed by Ajax by memory.
Yes. Now, I don't know if you've interviewed him.
No, I haven't. Not yet.
That would be a great interview. Yeah.
Yes. Let's do it, Mickey P. So
he did end up going to Ajax, and he's got some really ripper stories if you get an opportunity. But, I think he might have got a bit homesick.
Okay.
And, he got a couple of first team games. He tells stories of driving Van Basten to training on a daily basis and things like that. So, when you rub shoulders with players like that, you've made it.
Yeah. And Andrew Zinni, he'd have to be probably one of the fastest people. Was he fast as a junior?
100%. He was lightning.
Yes.
He had a really good running gait, really long strides, high knees, like a real athlete. I don't know whether you've seen his son playing.
Yes.
Well, it's almost a spitting image. It is almost as if you've taken Andrew Zinni from the 70s, 80s and brought him now into the 2000s. It's ridiculous how much alike they are. That's in my opinion. But very, very fast, very fast.
Did you guys smack? I mean, think about it. Like in that side, you've called out a number of Socceroos, not just players who played NSL, but people who've gone on to represent the nation. So it's a big thing from forget about one club producing NSL players and Socceroos, a team. So you guys must have smacked sides.
Yeah, we were very, very good side. Very good side. We very rarely lost. And we did smack sides. And the thing is that we played really good football.
Yep.
We one-touch football. Look, it's touted as being and arguably probably the best junior side ever to come out in Australia. And you'd be hard pressed to find any team, even in the modern era, that has produced as many players to go on and play successfully in the top tier of football.
I heard a rumor that if you were beating a team too much, the coach, I don't know whether it was Mickey P's dad, would just call the end of the game per se, but you'd go into a corner and just play keepings off. Is that that rumor? Yeah,
he'd say if we were smacking a team, he'd say freeze the game. So, and it's just more like, I suppose, it's not disrespectful to the opposition, but it's just maybe as like a training run. So when you are hard pressed against a team that's really pressing you, to freeze the game and slow it down a little bit and keep possession of the ball just to break the opposition's momentum. So we knew as soon as he said freeze the game, we knew that meant the opposition doesn't touch the ball. So we would go from one end of the ground, back, recycle, across to the other side, recycle, back again. And it was like we'd get hundreds and hundreds of people coming and watching us play in junior football, which was ridiculous back in those days.
Wow. Yeah. And would you say that it's testimony to the coaches there that coached you through that? Because, talent obviously is within a kid, but you need good mentors.
100%. Now, look, my initial coach, who I mentioned earlier, Strato Kalogiru, he was probably my first teacher in football. Apart from my father, where you go out in the park and have a kick and he teaches you the fundamentals, Strato Kalogiru taught us how to play as a team, how to play the 1-2, how to play a long pass, keep the ball on the ground, which part of the foot to use. Just the little things that I suppose enabled us to then progress to the next stage and then the next stage. So he taught us the right way to play football. And it showed, because there's so many of us that came through. And as I mentioned before, there was other players there who were probably maybe more talented than what we were.
Wow.
That probably decided schooling, one or two might have gone overseas, I think. So, it could have been anything. It really could have.
And you said you went on to then play reserve football and then senior football at Port Melbourne. Is that right? So what age do you transition into reserves, and then when do you get your first senior run?
All right, so it would have been around about 1982, 83 when we came out of there under 16s. But back then there was no, well, I don't think there was anyway, under 18s.
Nah.
There was no under 21s.
Nah.
Just went straight into reserve football.
Yes, 16s. Even me, who was like 10, 15 years later, it was 16s and then reserves.
Correct. Which meant that myself, I'll use myself as an example, smaller stature, skinny, the tiny little kid. I had to earn my spot in the team playing against adults, playing against 30-year-olds in reserve grade football. So you had to learn quick, smart, how to handle yourself. Whether it meant being a bit quicker, whether it meant being a bit smarter, you had to adapt to really getting kicked, getting hit, getting knocked. And I think the game has cleaned up quite a lot now. But back then it was some of the tackles, some of the hits, some of the, off the ball stuff was like, it was ridiculous. So you had to learn quick, smart. So around the early 80s, I went from under 16s straight to reserve football. But the likes of Joe Palla, Mickey P, Andrew Zinni, Big Aki, Mem, they all went into senior football. They were a bit bigger, a bit more solid. So I spent probably the first, I'd say, half of the year, 3/4 of the year maybe, in the reserves. Then I got picked in the senior team. Oh,
bravo. So we're talking about 16 going on 17.
Correct.
Yet to have turned 17, and you've got a senior game of football.
Correct.
And that's unheard of today. Like, think about, you're saying out of that group, forget about whatever level, like even state 4-5 today, which is like 7th tier, 8th tier football now, right? Because you got NPL 1, 2, 3, and we'll get onto your coaching career later, and then 2 state 1s and 2 state 2s, and
Yes.
and away we go. It doesn't matter where you are. If you're 16 years old or turning 17 and you're playing with men senior football, you're doing well for yourself.
But remember this, there was another 4 or 5 in there that were the same age. So that Port Melbourne team at that time had 5 or 6 17-year-olds playing in the old metropolitan leagues.
Okay.
Metropolitan Division 2 or 3, I think it was.
Okay.
Which was, you go to Corio, you go to Coringal, where the grounds were muddy, the grounds were heavy. There was no synthetic pitches back then.
Yes.
So, again, you had to navigate your way through the mud, through the water, through the slush. It made you a better player.
Yes. And then so later you get to play on the likes of Olympic Park, Middle Park, and Carpet. So that must have been a pleasure to get on those grounds. So do you remember how did you get the call up? Do you remember that when that first week? How did you know you were going to get the call up for the seniors? Were you training with the seniors? Who was coaching the side?
Mickey at Port Melbourne. Mickey Peterson's dad was coaching the side. Hans Peterson, God bless him. And I was always training with the seniors, but playing with the reserves. But towards the end of the season, he's called me up, and I played a few. I reckon I played about 6 or 7 games in the seniors, and then obviously it was the off season, and then I think there was 4 or 5 of them that moved on. Mickey Peterson went to Heidelberg. Okay, got drafted at Heidelberg. Andrew Zinni went to Brunswick Juventus. Then Joe Palla, myself, and Mehmet stayed at Port Melbourne 1 more year, and we really dominated that year. I think Mickey Peterson's dad moved on, and we had another coach called Eddie F. the Mill, and he was actually John Margaritis' best mate. So he coached us, and all 3 of us had really good years. And then we got picked up in the National League as well.
And was Port Melbourne at the same place, at J.L. Murphy Reserve? Is the same place?
Yes, correct.
Wow. Yes.
Used to have a round fence. So it used to be like, I think it was an old football ground, Aussie Rules. And then later on, many years later, they made it rectangular and, enclosed it and made it a nice little boutique ground. We used to have sheds. We used to get changed in sheds, corrugated iron sheds with no floors or anything. It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Guys who have got everything in today's modern day game, and they're still not happy.
Yes. And how many years did you stay at Port?
So I had another year at Port, 1984 was my last year at Port Melbourne, and I had a really good year. I ended up winning the player of the league.
Oh, bravo!
Yeah, and that was like as an 18-year-old. I ended up winning. I actually tied 33 votes each with a guy named Tony Heary, who ironically played for Paran Celtic at the time. They were called Paran Celtic. So myself and him, he was like, I think he was in his mid-30s and I was only 18, and we tied, did 33 votes each, ended up winning player of the year, and then I got picked up by Heidelberg.
And so was it a big difference in level of football? You're going from, metropolitan level football to what were they playing? National League?
Yeah, definitely was. Yeah, it was a big step up. With Heidelberg, Brian Garvey, he would come to a lot of the Port Melbourne games, and he signed me at Heidelberg, and I was in the senior squad and training with the likes of Theo Salamides, Charlie Yankos, Stevie Marley, who I mentioned before, Ian McKee, some really big name players, George Christopoulos, Jeff Olver. You walk into the dressing room as a young 18-year-old kid and you see these guys who you've been going and watching them play for many years, and you think, shit, I've got to really handle myself now,
Yeah.
So, training with the senior team, but I played the first 8 games in the youth league, National Youth League at the time. And I think I ended up scoring like about 15 goals in about 8 games.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in that league. And I got called up into the senior team. My debut for Heidelberg in the National League was at the Carrara Stadium in Brisbane, where Gold Coast Suns play there now, at Carrara. And we played against Brisbane City. We ended up winning 3-0, and I scored on my debut, which was...
Oh, how good's that?
Yeah, which was fantastic.
Thinking back to how you played, because you're not tall in stature. You're probably one of the smaller players on the pitch. Small, nuggety, but strong, very strong. Like I found an old photo of you, and I'll put it up as the title for this video as well. Your leg definition. Did you work at the gym or did you do extra weight training, or was that all pushing body weight?
No, that was. I think that was just genetics.
Okay.
I wasn't one to really. Back in those days, we weren't really much into going to the gyms and that.
Yeah.
But maybe I was fortunate because where I grew up, in the suburb that I grew up in, Hawthorne, I had a park right across the road to my house, which was I didn't have neighbours like across the road. I had a massive park, and probably 85% of my time was spent at that park, from the early ages, even till, in my early 20s. The other thing is that I lived next door to Dipper. The football.
Okay. Yes.
So he was my next door neighbour from a young age. So he went on and played 250 AFL games.
Of course.
And played 250 odd NSL games. So, if that's one for the history books too, I suppose, where two neighbours in completely two different sports have gone on and played that many games in their
And he was your childhood friend, you're saying, next door neighbour?
Yeah, he was a couple of years older than me.
Okay.
Many a time we'd be at the park kicking a ball, kicking a football, kicking a soccer ball, cricket, climbing trees, getting down, just little things that I suppose we were active. We were on our bikes, we were on a skateboard, we were chasing balls, we were doing things. And that's where that debate comes in now with the young generation now and back then. And you mentioned the definition in my legs and that. I'll be straight out. I never went to the gym. I never really did anything like that. It was just more natural, I suppose.
I suppose so, but it's that idea of pushing, that you can push body weight and still get fit.
Yes.
Right? And so, it goes to show. And you look now, the way in which people, young kids, going back our generation, even to my age, and I'm sort of 10 or so years younger than you, but we were out in the street and it was all unorganised play. Now for my kids to do a session, I need to organise a coach to do a one-on-one. It needs to be organised play. They don't just go and play, right?
Yes.
There's no chaos in the football. And I think what we had is X factor. And I think, I look at my little one and he can do with the ball 100 better things. He can do double around the world. I could never do that. I never even think to do that. But we had this idea of how to dribble somebody. And you look now, the juniors today, and I coach junior football, they don't know how to beat a man one-on-one. They just, very few players can know instinctively how to take someone on because they're coached in a robotic way.
In all my free time, whenever I got an opportunity, I was at that park, non-stop. And I'd have probably 7 or 8 soccer balls. And the park had houses that backed onto the park. So their fences was the border of the park. So I'd go around with the balls and I'd bang into the fences, bang, bang, bang. Ball would go over the fence, have to climb over, get it, come back again, bang into the fence, get it back. That wall, that fence was my buddy. He would pass the ball back to me.
Yeah.
There'd be a tree 30 metres away, 7 balls, I'd have to hit that tree. I wouldn't go in until I hit it, And then where I'm leading to with this is the people complained to the council. Bought me goals. The council bought goals and put goals.
Bravo.
Yes. So then that was when the real games started, We'd get 30 guys down there, would have a game. I was playing National League. Right, and I was playing games at the park with my mates and that. So but you wouldn't get that nowadays.
How good's that? So you talk about that that step up, let's say, from Port Melbourne and being in sides that a junior reserve senior side, the likes of having many NSL players in that side. And now you're stepping into a dressing room with Charlie Yankos, who is arguably one of Australia's best defenders, and he would set transfer records. I remember when he went to Adelaide, I think they paid $30,000 for him for a transfer. These are big names, Theo Salamidis, and probably big characters as well, right? So what's it like when you're 18? Obviously, you just still a young man, stepping into a dressing room, coached by Brian Garvey, Salamidis, Yankos. Was Hunter there at that time?
Hunter came, I think, a year or two.
Yeah, after. Okay. Yeah. So what's it like to have all that, those strong personalities in the dressing room?
Well, the thing is that for a couple of years prior to that, I would go and watch, because Mickey Peterson played a year there.
Okay.
I never played with Mickey at Heidelberg, but he was at Heidelberg. So I'd go and watch all the Heidelberg games. And I knew the players in terms of how they could play and their strengths, and everybody knew Charlie Yankos, everybody knew Jeff Ivor, Theo Salamidis. So I suppose the most important thing for when a young guy walks into a dressing room like that, and don't forget, we had quite a few younger guys. We had Stevie Tassios, Johnny Metaxas.
Stevie Tassios, what a quality player.
Fantastic.
Silky.
So,
if I had to describe him, I'd say silky.
Oh, mate, he was magnificent. There's no player in Australia that does what he could do back in those days. Even now, there's no player. The way he used to glide past players with the ball, his vision, it was fantastic. So us young guys had to, I suppose the most important thing was to earn the respect of the older guys. And the only way to do that is to be, first of all, listen to them. Secondly, try to improve every session, try to get better, try to do what they tell you to do. Show them that you really care. And I think, over the period, we managed to do that.
How many years did you stay at Heidelberg?
I was at Heidelberg. I played at Heidelberg 85, 86, 87. 3 years.
Okay.
3 years. So I had Brian Garvey as coach. I had John Margaritis as coach. And I had Roy McLaren as coach.
That's so atypical of Greek committees, every swapping out the coach thinking you get a better result. That's so atypical.
Yeah. That's always the case with the Greek clubs. Well, Brian Garvey left. He went to South Melbourne. So South Melbourne chased him. He went there. Then Roy McLaren came for a period of time. Wouldn't have even been a year. And then John Margaritis was there for about a year and a half.
Okay. And typically, within the Greek community, you supported one of two sides, depending on whether you're from the north of Greece, you gravitate towards Heidelberg, and other parts of Greece, you gravitate to South Melbourne. And your dad, you said you played for South Melbourne. Who did you support as a youngster?
Well, look, I was pretty fortunate that I could go to both teams. Because of my dad's allegiance to South Melbourne, because he played there, I suppose my early days of football was with South Melbourne.
Okay.
But then when Mickey Peterson started playing at Heidelberg, and a couple of friends early, then I'd go and watch Heidelberg as well.
You gravitated towards Heidelberg. So we'll get slightly ahead of ourselves, but you it's not the first time you sort of you switched up and back between both of those two sides.
No, well, 87 was my last year at Heidelberg.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there was a restructuring. We got relegated.
Yes.
Then I got a transfer to South Melbourne.
Okay.
Brian Garvey, as I mentioned before, became the coach at South Melbourne, and he chased me. And I got a transfer. Back then, I think it was $25,000 back then, transfer. Yeah. So I went to South Melbourne, and my first year at South Melbourne was 1988.
88. So call out some of the people in that side.
Okay. back then, South Melbourne made an overhaul of their squad. So there was the likes of Charlie Egan, Dougie Brown that had left, Kenny Murphy, Gary McDowell, there was Richard Miranda. There was quite a few of them that were there in like that 86, 87 period that the club moved on. And they went for more of a youth policy. They signed myself. They signed a boy called David Healy.
Yes.
Paul Foster, Craig Foster's brother. A boy called Harry Mikhail, who was at the old Bentley Greens back then. Paul Trimboli. Kimon Taliadoros. There was a couple of others.
Was Steve Blair there that year? Steve Blair
stayed on. Stevie Blair stayed on.
And McLaren in goals?
No, Bobby Russell stayed on.
Okay.
There was Congiatis. Congiatis was the goalkeeper. And then, yes, Bruce McLaren came later on in that year.
Okay.
Yes. Manny Anazakis was another one. Ange Postecoglou, he was there at the time. So, they went for a youth policy. And, we did quite well in the first couple of years.
Yep.
And Brian was there from 88 till 90. I say 88, 89. So 2 years, I think he coached. And then 1990 was the year that Ferenc Puskas came.
How good's that? It was the 1991 year that you guys won the flag. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. 1991, yes.
It was the 1991 season, right? So obviously played over the summer. And what an epic coach to have.
Yeah.
Talk to me about him, obviously legend of the game.
Look, we knew of the name. We knew of the name. And I'll go to myself. We knew of the name, but we probably weren't really aware of his stature. We knew he was a great player, but we weren't aware of his stature. And when he first came to the club, we weren't really in awe of the guy because we didn't really know. We knew Puskas is coming, he's coached here, he's coached in Greece, he's coached in all around the Saudi Arabia. I think he coached Chile. He coached quite a few teams. But once he came and just the fanfare around him from probably the older generation because they knew of him, then it just sort of started sinking in. And then you'd see old footage. Then you'd go and see him, with the Real Madrids and the old Hungarian side in Wembley.
The 50s, yeah.
Yeah. And, till this day, he still remains a really big part of my football makeup, that man. He was a gentleman. He was like, he was a friend. He was a gentleman. He was a football coach. He was someone that you would go to war for him. It's how did the likes of David Healy understand Ferenc Puskas? Because Puskas could hardly speak a word of English. So how did the communication go down the line to the likes of David Healy? Puskas spoke pretty good Greek.
Okay,
his Greek was good because he spent quite a few years in Greece. He had an assistant, Jimmy Pirgolios.
Yes.
So Puskas would talk to Jimmy in Greek. Jimmy would try to explain to us in English, and then Ange would have to sort of listen to what Jimmy was saying, and then Ange would have to tell us in proper English. Somewhere along that line, that translation was missed a little bit, but look, it was a great era of football.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate, and I thank God all the time because it was a blessing to play during that era.
I mean, I was in the crowd and that supporting South Melbourne, and arguably those battles that you would have with the likes of Melbourne, Croatia, and Adelaide City, and some big clubs, the likes of Marconi, some epic battles.
Oh, huge, huge. And the thing is, we were getting really good crowds. Crowds would flock to the game because we were a free-flowing side. We'd score goals. And that's what people want to see. You know, and Puskas had that mantra that if you concede 2 goals, you score 3. You concede 3 goals, you score 4. So he wasn't too fussed about conceding, but it was full on attack for him. And I think the people enjoyed that. Yeah. You know, there'd be the odd game where you lost because, you know, football is sometimes goes against you, but more times than not, we were playing attractive football, scoring goals, and the crowd was loving it.
And I remember you didn't mind the free kick, call it 25 yards, the ball's there, and you would run up and bang, and try and ping it. All of your shots, you think of like probably one of the best free kick takers ever played south of Kombutsianis, would be able to curl the ball and put it top corner. But when you hit it, you like to go through the ball with laces. So talk to me about, is that back to the park in Hawthorn when you hit it against the fence?
100%, 200%. That's where it all, your technique, your the way you strike it, your balance, where to hit the ball, that all comes back to all that practice at the park. And no one can say to you, it comes naturally in that. It might, but you have to work on it. You have to work on it. And even the best free kick takers in the world, Roberto Carlos, I guarantee you, he spent endless hours doing what he does, you know. And again, being smaller, I've only got a size 6 foot. My foot's tiny, but I used to rap on the ball. He used to smack the ball, and it comes back to again what you were saying about leg definition. Maybe that helped me as well. Yeah. I remember you pinging some rockets, and also you put a lot of kilometres in. Like I think there'd only be probably 1 or 2 players that would cover more grade. Maybe Wadey would cover more ground than you, but you hauled up and down. You were the engine of that south side. Would you say that was one of your strengths? Yeah. There was a couple of years there under Ferenc that my fitness levels were extreme, really extreme. I don't know whether it was to do with the training we were doing, but again, it probably comes down to being really active outside of football, doing a bit of extra work. There was a couple of years there, where my fitness levels were really, really hot, top notch. And I'd hate to think in today's era, if we had what they've got now with your GPS, with your dietitians, with all of that, I'd hate to think at what level we probably could have got to.
And you stayed at South for quite a few years. Who would you room with?
Joe Pella. Joe Pella. I'd room with Joe Pella. I think he chopped and changed quite a bit. You know what? I remember my first game away when I made my debut in
for Heidelberg.
For Heidelberg, I ended up rooming with the coach, Brian Garvey, which was a weird one. But Joe Pella, Mehmet, we chopped and changed quite a bit.
Was your room the quiet room, or were you?
We were rat bags. We were rat bags. We look. The good thing is as well, obviously, that we were all really close mates. We had that camaraderie. Look, so what happened was when Puskas came, I was already at South Melbourne. So Puskas arrives, and this is a story that goes. This is a good story. So they pick him up from the airport, and at the time, they were trying to get Mickey P out of Brunswick Juventus, on him at South Melbourne. So they picked up Puskas at the airport. They're driving him to his hotel. and they're talking amongst themselves, a couple of the committee men in the car, about Juventus getting Peterson, Juventus. Now they're talking Brunswick Juventus.
He's thinking accountability.
What are you worried about? I'll give the president a call in Italy, and we'll get him straight away. And they're going, that called him boss. Ferenc, boss. No, we're talking Juventus here, Brunswick Juventus. Yeah. And
how cool is that? Puskas and you, the president at Juventus, he just pick up the phone, get whatever player he wants.
Yeah. And we ended up getting Mickey Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ended up, a year later, I think we ended up getting Joe Palo and Mehmet Jurakovic.
Yes.
Both from Brunswick Juventus.
I think they got relegated that year or something. Is that when they got relegated? Yeah, Juventus and Mehmet came across?
Actually, Mehmet, I think, might have been at Footscray Just.
Okay, all right.
I think they both went to Footscray Just at the time, and we signed them from Footscray Just.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe Footscray got relegated as well.
Yeah. So
it ended up being myself. George Kalogiros was there as well, who was a junior at Port Melbourne. So it was myself, George Kalogiros, Mickey P, Mehmet Jurakovic, and Joe Pala playing for South Melbourne, the core of our junior team at Port Melbourne, winning a championship at South Melbourne.
That's quality.
Yeah. That's it.
And obviously big crowds, big expectation. Was the shirt heavy at South?
100%.
Yeah.
Especially for young Greek boy. Yeah, definitely. And people say, you're exaggerating. Nah, it was a heavy shirt.
Yeah.
And pardon my French, but you needed balls to play at that club.
Because the fans, if you had a stinker, they wouldn't be shy about speaking to you in Greek as you're walking off the pitch, saying a few choice words.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I suppose, being arguably the biggest club in Australia, they had every right to demand results. So, maybe we were easy targets for them, the Greek boys, but you knew that if you had a bad day, you had to deal with them, and they'd really, they'd go to war on you. They'd have, they'd have a few
and the papers and the the Neos Cosmos
But I think over a period of time, I think 7 years, 8 years that I was there, I think I earned the respect of
course.
It was good era.
And who would you say if you mark the likes of, you played against the likes of a Joe Biskic, lots of your Žaka Ojakovs, a lot of good players, right? So who would you say? I'm against so and so today. It's going to be a hard day in the office.
Look. For me, one of the best players that I ever played against was the guy that you just mentioned now, Žaka Ojakov. I thought he was absolutely brilliant, way ahead of his time. Fantastic footballer. Joe Biskic, another one.
But different player. So Ojakov was like a genius. Biskic could run up and down. He was very similar to you, I think. You and Joe played a very similar game.
Correct. Biskic was more of a right winger. I played the majority of my time as a left winger. Even though I was a right footer, I played the majority of my time as a left winger. Joe Biskic was always the enemy, being at Melbourne, Croatia. And I ended up playing with Biskic for a couple of years in Malaysia in the same team.
Oh, wow. Yes, you went overseas to Malaysia. We'll get to that. Yeah.
And I played with Biskic and we became really, really close friends, my family and his family.
That's good. I think Davo went there first. Alan Davidson went there first. And then Pala went there as well. And Joe Coletta, a bunch of people went to Malaysia.
Yes.
Jerry Gomez.
Mehmet Jurakovic.
Mehmet went there, yeah.
Mehmet won a couple of championships there. David Mitchell went there.
Yes.
There's a few from Australia that went and played there. And
good money.
Yeah, good money, good football, great crowds.
Yeah.
the football wasn't, I don't think it was as good as what it was here.
Yeah.
Probably the old standard here, but
a step below. Yeah, a step below.
Yeah,
probably like our state leagues.
But massive crowds, massive.
Yeah. And did you, after your time at South, did you end up going back to Heidelberg?
Okay, so when Puskas left, Jimmy Pirgullos took over, and then we had a couple of players come in. I think Francis Oratifu came in, Gary Kevin Muscat, a couple of others, Jason Polak.
Vaughan
Coveney came after.
Okay.
So they were there when Jimmy Pirgullos was there. Jimmy, I think, was there for a couple of years. We made the preliminary final 2 years in a row, and we didn't get through. So the club parted ways with Jimmy, and then Frank Arrock came in.
Yes.
I think 1994. Well, when Frank came in, he pulled me aside and said to me, listen, your services are no longer required. And
did you get a pre-season with him, or he just straight out said, I don't want you?
He straight out from, and funny enough, I caught up with the Port Melbourne junior boys probably about 6 weeks ago. And funny enough, Mickey Peterson grabbed me and he goes, listen, what happened back then with Frank Arrock? Why did they get rid of you? What? I said, Mickey, I don't know. He didn't want me. He just didn't want me. So, yeah.
Well, football's about opinions, isn't it? Like,
of course it is. And that's when I ended up going back to Heidelberg.
Okay.
And I played Heidelberg for a couple of years, 2-3 years at Heidelberg. Then I went to Malaysia.
And so you're back at Heidelberg is a bit of a homecoming.
Yeah, a bit of a homecoming. Completely different squad, completely different players. Just really, went for more of a youth policy. Got back into the National League, and the coach at the time was Michael Uricalo. Michael Uricalo from Sydney. Actually, the year I left South Melbourne, I don't know if you recall this, but there was a period of time before that when the National League finished and then restarted again, where players from the National League could go and play in the Victorian Premier League.
Okay.
So I went and played at Port Melbourne.
Okay.
And I had a ripper stint there. Like, it was probably about 14 games. Port Melbourne's first year in the VPL, in the Victorian Premier League. And they had a midfielder, Georgis Vingos. He got injured. So Takis Vingos, who was the coach, got me to play for him. We ended up making the grand final in that first year there. And I had a ripper year. So that was another reason why I was a bit confused why Frank Arrock got rid of me, because I was in red-hot form, really good form. But, them's the breaks. So I end up...
You think about the types of players that he got, though, like Tansel Basar. He liked the bigger, the Con Blatzers, even Oratifi, who his strengths were not, ball playing skills. He was forceful. He liked forceful players.
Ivan Kelic,
another forceful player. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
he went that way. Yeah. So I ended up at Heidelberg. We had signed a couple of good players. Andy Vlahos was there, good player. Bobby Despotovsky.
Wow.
Our striker at the time.
Quality.
Milan Blagojevic.
Another quality player.
David Miller was our goalkeeper.
Milan Blagojevic had the best hairdo, obviously, in the NSL, I reckon.
Yeah, he had the blonde tips and the pretty boy, yeah. But could play. Good play. We had a decent side. George Georgiadis, who was a fantastic player. Eric Vasiliadis.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we didn't do too well. We didn't do. And back then it was during that NSL where it was, when it was a draw, you had penalty kicks. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I don't.
Yeah. So if games came a draw, he ended up having penalty kicks, and you get an extra point. So you got a point each for the draw, and whoever won the penalty gets an extra point.
Okay.
So, yeah, it was. I don't know why they did that, but yeah. So I was
don't know that at all.
and then ended up being going to Malaysia.
Yeah, that's exciting. Were you married at this time? Single?
Yeah, married. I was married. My wife came along with us. We didn't have kids at the time.
Yep.
So it was a good working holiday, put it that way. You know, it was fantastic. The club put us up in a beautiful resort. Travelling away to away games, you know, 30,000 people, 40,000 people. Remember Jurankovic's team, I don't know if you're aware, Selangor.
Yeah.
Their home stadium, Shah Alam, fit 80,000 people.
Wow.
And they would get that every home game.
Wow.
Every home game.
Could you hear yourself think?
No. It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. I actually played in Brunei. In Brunei, we played a brand spanking new stadium. We were the first game there, 50,000 people. It was like rocking. The ground was rocking. Fantastic.
All right, Gus, if you had to relive one game, okay, of your career, okay, you can pick any game, knowing the result, okay, and your performance, where does your mind go back to?
Oh, geez. God, that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Just one game?
I suppose probably one game that really sticks out was Middle Park. I think it was 1988. No, later. It could have been 1990. South Melbourne versus George Cross.
Okay.
Good crowd, big crowd. We're on top. George Cross is near the bottom or middle of the table. And they had us early on in the second half. They had us at 3-1.
They're up.
3-1 up. And we managed to pull one back. Ange Postecoglou, great run down, cuts the ball back. One of their defenders handballed it. Penalty. 3-2. Still with, 15, 20 minutes to go. We get a throw in. It's played in, flicked onto me, and I chested it, and I did a bicycle.
Oh,
and it's
I was at that game. Yes.
3-3. And then I run to the fence.
Yes.
The fence, and the fence collapsed.
I was behind. I was at that game.
Yeah. So there's some really good photos of that actual me on the fence. And the fence sort of collapsing. If it wasn't for Kimon Taliodoros,
The crusher.
they would have crushed me. Yeah, he saw the fence going and he's dragged me off. He like literally pulled me off the bench.
I remember that overhead kick. Our quality.
And then we ended up winning 4-3.
4-3. Yes.
And that was like pandemonium. That was a huge game. A game that really sticks out was the semi-final in Adelaide against Adelaide City, going in there, and Hindmarsh at the time, Cooper Stadium now.
This is the first one, or the 92 one? The 92, 93?
90-91.
90-91, okay.
So we've beaten them in here 4-2 in the qualifying final or
whatever it is, yeah. And it sort of turned leg.
Yeah, then we played Melbourne, Croatia.
Okay.
The week after. They beat us 1-0. And I think they went straight to the grand final. Right? So then Adelaide City beat someone. I think they might have beaten Marconi.
Okay. And so this is your second chance. The second
one. But we go away to Adelaide City. And we go in there and the ground is rocking. And they're a super team. Super team. And we ended up beating them 1-0 in there. That was for us, that was the grand final. That was huge. Trimboli, I was lining up for a free kick, and just out of the blue, Mickey Peterson's come in and he's pushed me aside and he's taken a quick free kick and it's come off the post and Trimmers is running in, touch, goal, 1-0, finished. So that stands out.
What a silky. He could turn on a dime. You talk about some of the players he played with.
Phenomenal.
Bowley, like, you give him 30 centimetres, he'll find the space to turn you inside out and score.
Phenomenal. Unbelievable skill, technique, left foot, right foot.
Yeah.
Probably
somebody that could have gone and played in Italy or...
Fortunately, he just lacked that little bit of pace.
Yeah.
That if there was any flaw, which I don't think it was a flaw, but yeah, if he had that little bit of pace, he would have done what Viduka did in terms of these.
But you think like an Italian league would have suited him, that, in the mid-90s, like a...
Maybe, maybe. But then again, the Italian league back then was very defensive. So defensively, they were very, very strong. But fantastic.
Yeah, quality. Yeah, okay.
Fantastic.
And you you think about the likes of people who've gone on to coach, like you're coaching now, and Mem's coach, Pala's done big things, obviously in overseas and in the City Group, yourself, Ange Postecoglou. Did these people exhibit leadership qualities as players?
I'll go to the most successful, I suppose, in Ange. Ange was always a leader. He was. He was the captain of the side during his duration. Very articulate, very well spoken, serious when he had to be, led by example. So you knew that he had that instilled in him. He had it. Mm-hmm. Then you go to Mehmet. Mehmet's won championships, in Malaysia. He's won 2 or 3 championships there. Joe Palla's won 2 or 3 championships with Melbourne City in the youth team. He's won championships in the Greek 3rd division, which is Greek 3rd division, as you know, is cutthroat. You lose a couple of games there, knives come out straight away. So, he's done really well there. There's a good group of coaches. Johnny Anastasiadis is another one that I played with at Heidelberg. Very, very good coach.
Yeah, just until recently he was part of the coaching makeup there at Western United.
Correct. I'm not sure what he's doing at the moment, but yeah, I think he's split ways with them. Yeah. But another fantastic coach.
Yeah, and obviously another great player. He played many games in the Greek 1st division.
Correct. He played for Bulk, where I think he was there for 9 years, and really made a good name for himself there. Very, very successful. And then he came here and he won a couple of championships here with South.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And so you think about, you've gone on to coach many sides, and you probably gravitated to many of the Greek sides. You've coached Heidelberg and Port and South and Northcote. Done a couple of stints at Northcote. If you think back at your time and being very successful yourself in coaching, if you think back at your coaching career, which of the years that you think, that time at that club, really enjoyed my time there?
My first few years of coaching was probably more by default. I was at Heidelberg. I was injured, and I think Alan Davidson was actually coach, and he got a gig in Malaysia, so he left, and they didn't have time to get a coach. So they said, "Can you, help us out?" So I coached there pretty much as a player coach, but I was injured at the time. So I coached there for, I think 14, 15 games. Then similar happened at Port Melbourne. Similar thing happened at Port Melbourne, where I was a player coach there as well. I had a good couple of years at Port Melbourne, actually, my initial coaching. Then I ended up at Northcote, and my first couple of years at Northcote, again, I was a player coach, and then until one of the committee men a wise old man who I respect very much, came up to me and he said, maybe it's about time you hang the boots up and just concentrate on coaching. And I took his advice, and probably the best thing I ever did, because for my coaching anyway. I ended up winning 2 championships back to back at Northcote, getting him into the Victorian Premier League. Stayed there for a couple of years. Then I moved on to South Melbourne. I wasn't at South for long, only for just under 2 years. And then I took about 2 or 3 years off.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up going back to Oakley. Yeah, they enticed me out of the layoff that I had. Went to Oakley. We made a grand final in the first year that we were there in 2016. Stayed there for 3 years. Then I had another break. Went back to Northcote for a couple of years. Parted ways last year. Now I'm at Kingston. In a nutshell, that's, they're the clubs.
The one thing, if I look back, they all got a Hellenic influence. So, you ever get a call from any other?
I have had calls, yeah.
Yes.
I suppose it's just the timing of it more than anything.
Yeah.
When I left from Northcote, South Melbourne came, knocked on my door and said, listen. So I ended up there. And then from when I left from South Melbourne, like I said, I had a few years off. And then no clubs really, rang me or anything. And if they did, it had to be the right one. Oakley rang me and they wanted to meet up with me, and I went and met up with them, and I liked what they were saying, and I went in with Tsolakis together. And yeah, we were pretty successful. I mean, in the first year with a really limited budget, which is very unlike Oakley, we ended up making the grand final, and we're a bit stiff not to, actually win it.
And are you together with him now again at the?
Yeah, we're together at King.
So you're obviously good friends to do it again?
Good mates, yeah. Well, he was part of that junior team at Port Melbourne.
Oh, what was he?
Yes. So he was part of the team that was with us at South Melbourne that left and went to Port Melbourne. He was part of that team. So he was at Port Melbourne for many, many years. We're together. So if you go back, what were we, 10 years old? It's nearly 48, I'm 58, he's 57, 56. That's nearly 50-something years, 55 years almost.
Of friendship.
Yeah, 45 years friendship.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you guys are doing quite well. You're in second tier.
Yeah, we're in MPL 2. We're sitting on top of the league at the moment. We're a point clear, and we've got a very, very important game tomorrow night against Preston. At Preston, which who are 2 points behind us. And, it's a really important game for us. Really.
So
important.
Big ground. I was there, actually. Funny you should mention that. I was there last night, and just a tip for you, they're taking in the ground in 2 meters on each side. So they're bringing in the pitch. There's the inside word for you here.
I got a phone call earlier, and it was our gear steward from Kingston, and I didn't answer his call, and he sent me a text message. He goes, I've got news for you. Call me. So I called him, and he goes, breaking news. Preston's bringing the ground in 1.5 meters either side. And I thought, whoa. And now you've mentioned it. I thought,
no, 100%. I was there last night and speaking to Sasha on a different matter. And I said, you're bringing your ground in because that's a big pitch there at BT Connor Reserve. And he said, yeah, it hasn't really suited us. So we're bringing it in. Obviously, the length there, you can't change the length. But I'll just test it looking by eye. It looked like 2 meters to me, but it probably was 1.5 meters. But you'll see it when you rock up to the game.
Yeah. Well, now that confirmed. Well, I was a bit sceptical.
100%. I was there when they were marking it.
So he said it didn't suit them. Okay.
Yeah, he felt it. He feels that it'll better suit him that the width wasn't. So
maybe because we've got good wingers.
you think the width might be useful for you, but anyway, obviously within regulation, and Preston are allowed to do that, minimums and maximums. But yeah, I find it interesting, because why would you change your ground? I've seen. You talked about that you were your teammates with Eric at Heidelberg, and obviously he's at George Cross. I'm part of the coaching juniors there at George Cross, and often he brings in the ground to train if they know, let's say, for example, a team in their division, he trains a certain metric, he'll train the same metric.
Yes.
To train that week.
Yes.
Training on the ground. I mean, they literally, somebody in the committee will drive out and measure the ground and step it out.
Yes.
And a lot of detail that goes into, you're talking second and third and fourth tier football. A lot of thought goes into these games.
It's getting a lot more professional, I suppose.
Yes.
Even in at this level, in terms of that I mentioned before, with your GPSs, with your VO analysis. I don't know whether we've got the actual time to do all that because we're not professional. And, do you forego training to do that part of the game, or do you train? I'm more of the opinion that you've got to train more, and then the analysis and that, you talk to individual players, explain to them what you want, what they did right, what they didn't do right, and then maybe touch on it as a group, but don't spend too much time on it, because I think you limit yourself when you take away from your training.
Yes. So big game for you tomorrow night, and obviously I'll look at, let's say, for example, likes of Western United, Preston, who have spent big money in that league. You guys are well up there, and probably without the names that. So you guys would you say that you're batting slightly above your post?
Oh, definitely. Look, Kingston last year, I wasn't there last year, but they just saved relegation by one game.
Yes.
They beat Victory 1-0
at the last the elimination game.
Correct, and they stayed in NPL 2. Now, that squad from then, with maybe a couple of players that were brought in, 2 or 3 players, young players, unknown players, to be where we're at the moment it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And full credit to the boys. They've done a marvellous job, away games, home games, pulling results. And it's the most competitive league that anyone has ever pretty much seen. It's ridiculous that from the top team to the bottom, I think there's 15 points separating, 14 points.
Yes, anybody can beat anybody in that league. It's very tight.
So teams that sit in 5th that might be looking at maybe catching 2nd has to look over their shoulder, because if they lose a couple in a row, they're in relegation zone. So it makes every game so important.
But if you get promoted, you'll take it, obviously.
100%. I'm not, people come up and they say, oh, do you really want to get promoted? Well, you never go into a season and you say, oh, let's go and play, but we're not going to get promoted. You play to be the best you can be. And if the best you can be is being on top of the ladder, so be it, And they say, oh, will you have the funds to do this? Will you be able to do that? Well, you'll adapt. You'll find them. You're not going to, if we're good enough to go up, we're good enough to go up.
Yep.
If we're not good enough to stay there, we'll come back down.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
Football. That's football.
That's a good philosophy. And now that you're dealing with youngsters, and you've probably given plenty of youngster his first opportunity.
Yeah.
And now you're speaking to that 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old boy or girl, and they're on that fringe of making the first team, but they're not quite there yet. What advice do you have for them?
First of all, might be a bit controversial, but it's a different generation that we're talking to now, isn't it? It's a different era. If I was talking to myself back then, obviously it'd be to work hard, be respectful, do what your coach tells you. And that's what I would tell the kids now. Work as hard as you possibly can. On the ball, off the ball, whether at training, whether you're not at training, do some extra stuff on your own, That's the main advice I'd give. But I still find this generation, how do I put it? If I say to someone, hey, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that? He'd say, yeah, but what about that guy? Why didn't he do it? But I'm not talking about that guy. I'm talking about you. So I'm not sure whether they're strong enough or tough enough now.
So you're saying there's an entitlement and there's a lack of mental resiliency.
100%. And it's too easy for them now to, you're on the bench this week, you're on the bench next week. Oh, yeah, I'm leaving, I'm going to another club. It's too easy. Instead of fighting for their position, instead of fighting to get back in the team, instead of fighting for the cause, they would just say, yeah, I'm going to move on. I'm going to go and play over there. I'm going to go and play over here. Whereas back in the day, we didn't move teams. I was at Port, I don't know about I was at Port Melbourne and I stayed at Port Melbourne right through. You very rarely see that nowadays. Very rarely. Kids are dropping from one team to the next to the next. Kids are 1 year under 12s, NPL 1 team, might be Northcote. Next year they go to Bulleen. Next year they go to Brunswick Juventus. Next year they go to South Melbourne. Next year they come back to Northcote. You don't get any stability there. You don't get any, you don't build a culture for your club. And culture's huge at our level. Huge to have a culture. You'd know that yourself with Western Suburbs. Harry, isn't it?
Harry Matkovic's there, yeah.
Doing a marvellous job, but I guarantee you he's got a really good culture going. That's what helps you slowly creep up that table.
Great words of advice. Peter Tsolakis, probably one of the smallest lads to ever go on a NSL pitch, but you had a heart of gold and you worked your tail off. Thank you so much for this conversation and your continued contribution to Australian football.
Thank you very, very much. It was my pleasure. I appreciate it.
Hey guys, we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our wonderful guest. If you like this type of content and would like to see more, how about you hit the like and subscribe button? And have a fantastic day.